The problem is that fear of punishment that may be necessary at an early stage of a person's life, both in the day-to-day life and in religious life, many people don't move on from that. And they end up as an adult, otherwise mature and sophisticated, still with the conception of reward and punishment and hell and threat and yirah that they had as a child. And therefore they end up dealing with religion and God and reward and punishment in a very immature way. In the same way that they'll think of God in the same way that their kindergarten teacher taught them as though they're some old man in the sky.
This is Listening to Understand, where sensitive Jewish truth seekers gather in a safe place for candid conversations on challenging topics. When we listen to truly understand, and not in order to respond, we can replace judgment with curiosity and open our hearts to every Jew, regardless of their personal choices. As Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. I'm Atana. Let's get started.
As a thinker, scholar, and author of two acclaimed books, Judaism Acclaimed and Talmud Acclaimed, Rabbi Shmuel Phillips dives into the pivotal role of morality within Judaism and how Jewish teachings define concepts of the afterlife and Geyhinom, heaven and hell, from biblical narratives and rabbinic literature, and explores the complexities of ethical decision-making in Jewish life. While Teshuvah, repentance, and Hoda'ah, acknowledgment, foster spiritual growth and strengthen one's connection with God, perspectives from historical narratives and philosophical insights illustrate the dynamic interplay between morality and Jewish identity and how historical figures grappled with moral challenges and emerged as enduring role models of resilience and introspection, and emphasize the universal lessons that can be gleaned from Jewish teachings on morality. The timeless wisdom of Jewish tradition offer a compelling perspective on how Judaism continues to inspire moral integrity and ethical responsibility in an ever-changing world. Rabbi Shmuel Phillips was born and raised in England and has spent almost 2 decades studying in yeshiva and kollel in Israel, and has also completed a law degree from the University of London. And now your host, Matana.
Thank you for joining me here.
It's an honor and a privilege to be on this podcast. Thank you very much for having me.
I was introduced to your work through Matt Schneeweiss. Matt Schneeweiss came through our doors in growing up in Israel. He stayed in our home with his father, I would say, maybe 30 years ago. And although he was a young child at the time, now I call him my educator, my Rebbe, because he's so informative and he digs deep into understanding truth. And he is willing to speak about things that a lot of people are not willing to speak about. And he really brings me so much inspiration. And when I reached out to him and I said, who should I interview on the topic of hell, understanding hell from the Jewish perspective? What is hell? Where is hell? How can we come to terms with hell and approach Judaism in the most authentic, meaningful way in our day-to-day life? And he said, go to Rabbi Shmuel. So I'm very grateful that you're here.
Interesting you mention him, because having brought out my book, my first book was about 5 years ago now. And straight after that, instead of being able to promote and do book launches and book tours, we had the whole corona and the lockdowns. And I was interacting with a lot of people online, and quite a lot. And I never really got to meet them in person. And these people I felt I knew very well, and I never really got to meet. And one of them was Matt. We discussed on many points of Facebook forums and things like that. And we realized that we had some very similar ideas and similar approaches to things. So I actually got to meet him recently, a couple of months ago, on my trip to America, which was very nice.
So I'm very grateful to people like Matt that introduced me to my next part of my education. And I want to understand a little bit about your books that you wrote. You wrote 2 books, Judaism Reclaim and Talmud Reclaim. Why those books?
They sound quite similar, but they're actually quite different. The first book was never really intended to be a book. It was something which started up as an email circular I was sending around. I stayed in yeshiva in Yerushalayim. I stayed quite a bit longer than some of my friends. And I was in touch with them. We had WhatsApp groups, we had conversations, and I slowly realized that many of them who'd been in yeshiva for 2 years, 3 years, and had spent their time studying various different sectors of Gemara, done quite well in yeshiva. They got to the outside world, to universities, to college campuses, to jobs, to meeting other people. And suddenly they were confronted with various bigger questions about religion, which they'd either never really thought about, or they'd pushed away and never really considered, and that their yeshiva education hadn't always really prepared them for. And with some of the wider reading I'd been doing, particularly the writings of the Rambam, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, I found that many of these topics had been dealt with in a very sophisticated, very comprehensive way, but people don't really have access to, especially in the yeshiva world, people don't have such access to and connection to these works. They're not really emphasized so much. So many people just didn't realize that Judaism has some pretty strong answers, some very well-developed discussion of the sort of the moral and the spiritual questions that they were coming across. So obviously they have to be repackaged, they have to be placed in the 21st century context of a lot of the people to be able to deal with that. But I started doing that as an email circular. And after a year or so, people said it could be helpful to many people. So why don't you try and put this together into a book? Gradually, bit by bit, these different email circulars were compiled into a book. That's why it's got a parsha. Parsha follows the order of the parsha. And yeah, bit by bit, I sent around the different essays, and people were finding it helpful. I built up additional topics, and they really were intended primarily for people who had some kind of yeshiva education, but felt they were missing something when it came to dealing with the bigger topics of Judaism. Talmud Reclaimed then moved that same kind of idea, that same sort of framework, but specifically within the realm of halacha and Talmud. What sort of halacha is binding? How do we understand the halachic system, the Talmud, and the oral tradition? What do we understand to have come from Sinai? What can change? What can't change? Does it's Sanhedrin? And what's having my legal background? I did a law degree from London, so I was looking at it as a lawyer, so to speak. So what is the binding authority in Jewish law? What are the processes religion can and can't change? And many of these topics, you ask people who've been studying Gemara, studying halacha for 5, 10, 15 years, and they're not always so comfortable dealing with it. And again, the Rambam has a comprehensive system with which to work this. So that was the framework which I was trying to address.
What was the feedback that you got from the world, from the more modern Orthodox to the more yeshiva system from your books?
So a book like this is never going to completely satisfy everyone. Some people will think you've been drifted too far towards the academic side. I do bring in academic voices, sometimes to challenge them, sometimes to enhance the more traditional voices that I bring in. Whereas other people found that the balance I struck was very helpful. In particular, I found that, or I was a bit concerned about bringing things about biblical criticism, some of the challenges to Amunah, some of the challenges to Torah Sinai, which have come from academia, which many people in the yeshiva world are maybe vaguely aware of, but don't really get into. So it's a question. Some people will say, don't bring up these questions, don't bring up these topics, because you're going to cause people to have a crisis of faith. Others will say that if people are going to go out into the outside world at some point, they're likely to confront some of these questions on social media or Shabbat tables or whatever it's going to be. And if they've never heard anyone discuss it in a religious format, in a traditional format, they're going to think these are questions the rabbis just don't really have an answer to. They don't have a system for dealing with. Whereas again, Rambam or Rav Hirsch do, if once you've unpacked and then decoded their system and put it back together again, they do have the basic tools for approaching these questions. I bring in other more modern scholars, Orthodox scholars like Joshua Barnum, who's addressed these questions from again, it's a traditional perspective, but it suggests ideas, it puts forward ideas that not everyone's comfortable with. So I did expect some pushback on it, and I was pleasantly surprised to find how little criticism it got.
Wow. What do you think is the most controversial topic you were afraid to write about that got a positive feedback?
Some of it was not a particular topic, but just bringing in academic voices, because they are not part of the normal conversation, normal discussion point in a Haredi or even in many modern Orthodox study halls. Particularly when it comes to academic criticism, when you're dealing with people who challenge the very fabric of Torah Sinai, the very belief of Torah Sinai, suggesting that it's been written by humans, there's multiple authorship of the Torah, and they point to all different arguments. So some will just want to hide away from that. It's not something we want to deal with. It's not something we want to expose our students to. even when it comes to Talmud, which academic Talmud criticism is, again, it's not frequently dealt with in the yeshiva world. It's not heresy in any way, but discussing ideas of the Torah Shabbal Peh, the oral tradition, and where it comes from. There was a certain Rosh Yeshiva out there in America who didn't want me to come and discuss these matters in his yeshiva, despite the fact that some of his students have contacted me and wanted me to come along and speak at the institution, because we don't address these topics. Our students are supposed to believe in this Munah Pshuta, simple belief. And there are such paths within Judaism. The question, this is something I deal with in my introduction to my first book, is how realistic is it to expect people who are exposed to the outside world, who are familiar with what goes on in some of the discussion there, have social media, read different Torah that come from different points. How realistic is it to say we're going to build up a wall around ourselves or just have a Munah Pshuta and not expect our students to struggle when they don't have responses to some of the questions for which there are answers in the tradition? But that was some of the interesting discussion points that people brought up after my book.
I find it fascinating that the world is still in fear of analyzing what the Talmud analyzes. So there's like this, like you said, a wall. Let's put a barrier between really the analytic thoughts that are in the scriptures. Why not bring them up, and why not gift it to the Jew as the ability to choose their relationship and their beliefs from a deeper perspective? What is the fear based on?
Some fear you can understand, because certain sorts of questions are in the level of maturity to really deal with. And some of the ones we're going to discuss tonight, the subject of hell, for example. If you're going to look at the Rambam's approach, it's something which is sophisticated. If you throw people into it at the deep end, they may not have the tools, especially for dealing with younger students. They just may not have the tools of dealing with it. The current generation is a generation which expects instant responses and answers to everything. If you can't fully answer everything, it's very difficult to tell them, come and read this book, think about it for a while. In the next few years, you'll develop an ability to appreciate what the answers to these questions are. Putting it a different way, it's much easier to challenge and destroy an idea and a theory than to build up a serious response. Not just in religion, when you're dealing with politics, when you're dealing with science, when you're dealing with climate change, any sort of topic. It's very easy to rubbish anything that someone puts forward and throw questions out of it. Often a response requires you to build up several premises, and which themselves rely on ideas that the student may not be familiar with. So it requires a certain level of patience and maturity for students to be able to deal with this. So that's one reason why this approach may not be automatically appropriate for everyone. But it should definitely be available for people that can help. That's something I would say.
I have a hard time with the fact that Judaism is such a complex and wide points of view. And they teach us very early on Shivim Panim LaTorah. Very early on, every kid could say Shivim Panim LaTorah. But do we live it? Do we really believe it? Or do we really stick to one approach and we say Shivim Panim LaTorah, but we're going to choose for you which panim would be good for you. I'm not going to allow you to analyze on your own because you can't, because you're not the Rambam, you're not Rashi, and you're not Pirkei Avot. You're just not as good as them, and you don't have the comprehension or the ability to think as big as them. In a way, God gave the Torah to them to explain it to you, and you have to be the robot of what they understood way back and just believe in the system without analyzing.
And that very much empowers the people who are teaching and who are making those decisions. It's always important to be able to set the parameters. Yes, Shivim Panim LaTorah, there are 70 faces for the Torah. We also sometimes hear the expression, well, that's the 71st, meaning, yes, there are multiple options to choose from, but what you're saying goes out of the parameters of that. And that's something I address more in my second book, because that goes into legal authority. What is binding authority? Post-Talmud especially, who is qualified to say this is legitimate and that is not legitimate? That is a very big topic.
Yeah. So you were saying before that discussions will happen at Shabbos tables, and that's what happens by us. And a lot of kids from our community love coming to us because there is no discussion that's not allowed at our table. We have a rule. There's no cursing and there's no guys singing at our Shabbos table. But anything else, any discussion, we can have. And one of the things that my kids know that I often say, hell is not a place that I believe in. I don't choose to believe in hell because I think we borrowed that concept from other religions. I think the hell that they teach you in school is not the hell that Judaism really talks about. It's not the place that God wants us to approach life with. And it became a joke at our Shabbos table. Mommy or Matana doesn't believe in hell. Of course, there's no hell. And it's always, there's no hell. So turn on your phone on Shabbos. There's no hell. So go steal. There's no hell. And I always say, why is it just because there's no hell, you can fill in the blank? Isn't that such a sad existence that the only reason we do things is because of the fear of hell?
I would agree with you to an extent, meaning when you're dealing with someone who hasn't yet built up a sophisticated understanding of their Judaism, then sometimes if you want to train them, to teach them if you're dealing with a child, for example, we'll give an example. If you have a toddler who's running into the streets and they're about to get hit by a car and you just pull them back, you're worried they're going to do that again. You're not going to sit there discussing the merits of the situation, and you're going to threaten them. If you do that again, you're in trouble. This is going to happen. Or some people are worried their kids are getting into drugs. If you do that, you're grounded. And you try to get them scared because you're worried for their well-being. And you hope that over time they will learn to understand that your rules and everything you're telling them is coming from a good place. It's because you love them and you want the best for them. And that's something which you hope as the child grows up, they will very much need to, or you hope they will definitely develop
or
great
acquire
maturity and sophistication. But where the child is at that point, sometimes there needs to be threats. It says in Pirkei Avot that without the fear of the government, one man will swallow the other one alive. There's definitely a role for yira, for fear. But the problem is that fear of punishment that may be necessary at an early stage of a person's life, both in the day-to-day life and in religious life, many people don't move on from that. And they end up as an adult, otherwise mature and sophisticated, still with the conception of reward and punishment and hell and threat and yira that they had as a child. And therefore they end up dealing with religion and God and reward and punishment in a very immature way. In the same way that they'll think of God in the same way that their kindergarten teacher taught them as though some old man in the sky. Or they'll think of why am I doing mitzvot, to get some sort of bonus or reward. Or the Rambam actually gives a mashal of this when he's trying to get to the idea of doing a mitzvah lishma, which is doing what is right for the sake of what is right. And he describes a kid who starts off in, we call it elementary school in America, and this kid, you're trying to teach them Aleph Bet, you're trying to teach them a bit of Torah, and the kid doesn't really understand why it's important, why it's so great. The teacher will have to have, I'm going to expand a little bit on the Rambam's example. He'll have the candy, he'll have the money, he'll have the threat of the punishment as well, because he needs to get the kid to sit down and learn Aleph Bet, to sit down and start learning a bit of Chumash. But the hope is that at some point, he'll develop and understand the truth and the goodness and the benefits of learning Torah and internalizing Torah's lessons. But some kids, as they grow up, instead of having the candy that the teacher's giving, there'll be a monetary prize. Then they'll want to get into the right yeshiva for the right names of the honor. They'll want to get the right shidduch. They'll want to get this. They want to marry their kids off. They want the right position of the rabbi. And the Rambam's basically making fun of these people. They go through their whole life. And you can have people who are in rabbinic positions even, whose whole motive and the whole way they relate to God and Judaism is, I want that bit of honor. I don't want to get that punishment. I don't want to be struck down. And they've never gone past, as the Rambam puts it, they've never gone past being that little kid in the classroom. Their relationship with God is no more sophisticated than that 5-year-old sitting in the classroom. Just because they're an adult, what entices them is not the candy, it's the position. It's the seat of honor in the synagogue. It's the monetary reward of being given a certain job. And I think it's very much true of what you're saying. Yes, there is some kind of role for yira, for fear, within Judaism, and we do find that as well. You know what is above you. There's always an eye watching you, listening, and we find certain threatening tones, not so strongly emphasized. We find them in Tanakh, we find them in the Mishnah, but that is not the clearly not the ikar of Judaism. Judaism is supposed to be a relationship with God, and we say mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, from engaging with Judaism not for the right reason, which is fear and wanting to get the reward. We are supposed to start off a process through which we appreciate what Judaism is and end up engaging with God at a lishma level, out of appreciation for the greatness of his lessons and the moral, the spiritual refinement that the Torah brings.
One of the saddest existence for me is to see, for me as well in my life, until I went through my mental health challenge of really desiring a relationship with God. Before, it was just out of this is what we do and this is how we show up, versus really intimacy with God. And so often I see the robotic, just even a little kid that they tell each other off. You're not allowed to. Zeh asur, zeh avera. Like those authorities from when they're 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years old, that desire to be the authority, to tell somebody else if it's allowed or not allowed. And it's so sad because instead of going in and saying, I'm going to develop the relationship with my God for me, my incredible privilege of being a Jew, that I have access to Kol HaTorah Kula and the roadmap to success of life. It's a privilege.
Right. It's one of the sad questions I hear. I do sometimes question and answer sessions in yeshivot and seminaries. And one of the questions that always floors me, is I've got no way of answering it, is why are we bound to keep the Torah just because our ancestors at Sinai agreed to it? Why does it bind us? I just don't think of Judaism and the Torah in that way. I do it because I'm bound to. The thought doesn't cross my mind. As you say, it's a privilege. It's something which is so meaningful and my whole life is based on. It never occurs to me, I'm doing this because I'm bound to, because my ancestors took a vow or whatever it means. It's so foreign to me that I find it hard to even respond to these questions.
But there are
teenagers,
plenty.
18, 19-year-olds who are relating to Judaism in this way. And I find it very hard to even respond to them because it was taken at cross purposes.
Yeah. And I think the great service that you're doing to the world is teaching the privilege versus the fear. Because very often in yeshivot and in schools, we teach about the fear. And this is what we have to do versus let's understand it and let's build the relationship. And there's this complexity. And there's not one size fits all, and what size fits you, and where are you at now? And one of the reasons why I really wanted to address this topic of hell, because I think it's important for people to understand, what does Torah say about hell, Geyhinom? Do we understand it? What does punishment even mean? What is the afterlife? What is afterlife? And how can we make every day in this world count and meaningful, not only to not get that spank if I run into the street as a 3-year-old, as a 2-year-old. Like we grew up, let's get the full beauty of living with the Torah and understanding and even removing that fear of hell. And whenever I ask somebody, this was a fascinating experience. Whenever I'll say, listen, I choose to not believe in hell the way people talk about it. I don't know what hell, I'll say, I don't know what hell is. And I know that I don't know, but I understand that I want to approach Judaism because I get to, because I choose to, because I want to learn through it. And I might not until 120 to learn it all, but I'm going to do the best I can. I don't want it to be out of fear of punishment. That's my choice. So they say to me, if you don't believe in hell, so where's Hitler? This is the common question I get. And I ask myself, why is Hitler the madad, the measurement of hell?
Is that right?
Do we not see a suffering for greatness in this world that we don't question that? So why is the fact that we don't understand what happened to Hitler an understanding that it has to be punishment for Hitler?
Right. I think it is a strong, relevant question, but it's not really a starting point of discussing afterlife and reward and punishment. It's an afterthought.
Yeah. So what would you say if someone asked you, so where's Hitler?
So this question really needs a whole lot of introductions, many of which you alluded to, which is, what is the afterlife in Judaism? What does the Torah, what does Tanakh actually say about heaven and hell? And how do we understand it? And the answer is, it says very little. which is actually very interesting. I was listening to, I don't know how I got to it. It was a day or two ago. I was listening to it was a news item, and following on from that, as YouTube always does, it was some Muslim talking about the Israel-Palestine imam, talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict, and he was talking about how the Jews are what they are, not very high in his estimation, because they don't believe in hell. So it's got me interested. So I started Googling, what do the Muslims believe in hell? And it's a whole long 7 different levels of hell and precise definitions of different sort of suffering that you get. And it basically looks like some sadist has sat there writing out those fantasies. It's crazy. And you don't find anything like that in the Jewish scriptures at all. The Christians have more, but I think the Islamic hell and the Islamic afterlife altogether is a very physical way of approaching things, both the reward and the punishment, the 70 virgins and
is that a myth, by the way?
It's part of the belief, and that is why, if you look at why Islam is so popular among masses, it gains such popular support, because it's a reward and punishment that's very easy. You go to people who are illiterate and don't know very much, and you promise them the 70 virgins and tell them that if they don't listen to what you're saying, they're going to go to these 7 levels of hell and be burnt up and for everlasting burning, and that's something which will get people listening. So it's much easier to proselytize and that sort of thing than Judaism, which, what does it say about it? What is my reward and punishment in the next world? There are definitely references to it in Tanakh. We talk about the Sha'ah. There's discussion in Koheles about the body dies and the spirit returns to God. There's a Tzror HaChaim. There's definitely, when people die, the Avot die, they go back, they go back to their fathers, to their people. There's definitely references to the fact there is some kind of afterlife, but it's not really discussed at all what it is. There are certain synonyms for, the Rambam talks about in chapter 8 of Hilchot Teshuvah. He talks about punishment in the afterlife. The ultimate punishment for him is koros, being cut off, having no relationship with God. The Rambam, that's the worst possible thing you can imagine. And he actually brings various terms which are mentioned by the prophets. One of them is some sort of fire. The other one is a leech, the pits of destruction. He says these are all metaphors for a lack of relationship with God, just being completely cast off in the afterlife. The Radak says a similar thing. So there's the Metzudas Tzion, and there's one passage in, I don't know exactly where it is. I think it's in Yeshayahu, which talks about some kind of some sort of fire which is prepared in the future for the sinners. And Radak Metzudas Tzion says straight on the spot, this is a mashal, this is a metaphor, because we don't really know what reward and punishment is. Rambam brings down in his Karev and his principles of faith that we have to believe in some kind of divine system of justice. There is reward and punishment, and the main part of it takes place after we die. Beyond that, we just don't know. And there are 2 reasons why the Torah doesn't really go into this. One, which is the Rambam discusses in his introduction to Chelek. Chelek is the Perek of Gemara, which talks a lot about the afterlife. Right. The Rambam has a long and fascinating and very important introduction to this. And he talks about how we just don't know. We can't describe anything about the afterlife. And there's a basic reason for this, because it's something which relates to the soul. The soul is a fully spiritual entity. So any physical term that we use to describe the experience of the soul in the next world has got to be a metaphor. It cannot be literal. A soul is a spiritual entity, so how can a fire burn it? And this is one of the main questions that I always came up with. What do you mean the soul is going to burn? Well, is my body in the world to come? Is my soul in the world to come? For the Rambam delineates very clearly between the two. It's only the soul. So the soul gets burned. Fire is a physical entity. So Rambam, Radak, many others say this is just a metaphor for the idea that some kind of punishment can be visited upon the sinners. What that is, we don't really know, and we don't really get into it. And even if we try, the Rambam says even if even the prophets who experience a very high level of knowledge of God and his divine system, Ayin Lo Rasa, they never really got to see and understand what the afterlife is. So it's a principle of faith. We know there is some kind of reward and punishment, but we don't go into it. We don't really, in the Zohar and Kabbalah, there's more discussed exactly what is a metaphor, what isn't there. I'm not going to get into, I don't know enough about. Kabbalah. But going the main positions of the Rambam and the Rishonim, again, the Rambam talks about some kind of spiritual fire, maybe. Again, it's also getting more mystical and Kabbalistic. But there's an additional point from Rav Hirsch, which I particularly find fascinating. And he says that for the Jewish people, where the Torah is given, this is an important principle altogether when you're just looking at the Torah and you're combating academic criticism. But he says you have to look at the Torah the way the Jews in the desert would have seen it. They came out of Egypt, and the afterlife, heaven and hell, was so strongly emphasized in Egypt and in the Asian world altogether, but particularly in Egypt. You see that the kings built small palaces for themselves, the pyramids, all the impressive ancient architecture that we see is all built for the afterlife. The whole world was the afterlife. Everyone was obsessed with the afterlife. So the Jews didn't need to be told about it. It was something they were living. What Rahash says is why to be emphasized is this world, here and now. This is my response to, I didn't speak to him, my response to this Islamic imam. He sees the thing, if you really believe in the afterlife, that's going to govern everything you do in this world. Why don't you just commit suicide and go to heaven? Rav Hirsch is saying Judaism wants us to build up a godly community to elevate this world and to refine ourselves morally, spiritually, intellectually, and build a community of God to pass on and internalize God's lessons. That's the purpose of the Torah. Yes, there is an afterlife. Yes, there is all that, but that's not our focus. The Torah is always trying to focus us away from that system of reward and punishment into the here and now, into being motivated to build up as individuals, as communities, and implement the Torah's values in our lives. So that's it. That's a couple of starting off points. So what was your question again?
You gave me an introduction to where the Talmud Torah sources about where we touch upon hell is Ha'im Geyhinom min Torah, Efo Geyhinom min Torah u'met Talmud. You're saying that we don't have so many sources, and even the sources we have, the Rambam and the are saying we don't even understand it. Even the Rambam says, I don't really understand it, and I want to leave it at the fact that I won't understand it because it's a spiritual place, and a physical body can't understand beyond the physical part of the afterlife.
And our faith just is that there is a system of reward and punishment, that God monitors what's going on and has a system for dealing with it. That is our faith. And that involves something in the afterlife. The Olam Haba is definitely part of it. But again, for the Rambam, we go back to him, the whole emphasis, as we mentioned before, is the relationship with God. The biggest punishment a person can have is paray, being cut off.
Exactly what I wanted to highlight from what you said, that my Morah, Jessie Fishbein, she sent me all the texts a few months ago. I'm like, send me everything. I want to read it out at my Shabbos table. And I said, guys, listen, I'm not as smart as the Rambam, but this is exactly what I was saying. It's all about the relationship. And the Rambam is saying that the ultimate punishment is karet. Now, what do they really teach us, karet? That your kids are going to die, then future generations are going to die. You're not going to have a continuation for your legacy, whatever. All these fears, like, oh my God, I better keep halacha, not eat on Yom Kippur, nida. The intimacy with God, the relationship with God is the reward. So the ultimate punishment, if you can't even access, that you will be cut off from the relationship.
The Rambam puts it very bluntly that you basically become like an animal. You've been given this Tzedek Elokim, you've been given this, you've been created in God's image, you've been given this soul, this mind, which can develop you, that can raise you above the physical world, the animal kingdom. And by acting in a certain way and breaking your relationship with God, you're basically making yourself like an animal. You get cut off and just end existence like an animal. That's really where the Rambam writes.
Do you have it? Because it's a beautiful way. Do you have that? It's a beautiful part of the Rambam where he explains that. Do you have it that you can read it out to us? And
which part is that? About being cut off like an animal?
Yeah, it's so beautiful the way he puts it. And it's so straightforward. And
give me a second.
It's so empowering to know that the greatest reward is the relationship.
The reward of the righteous is they will merit this pleasure and take part in this good. The retribution of the wicked is they will not merit this life to have the connection to God in the world to come. Rather, they will be cut off and die. Whoever does not merit this life is truly dead, will not live forever. Rather, he'll be cut off in his wickedness and perish as a beast. It doesn't quite put it. There are other quotes elsewhere. I'm not sure I've got the maybe scrap that one.
Maybe we'll put it in the show notes, that little part, because I think it's so beautifully said.
I go into this in chapter 68 of my Judaism Reclaimed, where I go a lot into hell and the afterlife, just discussing how for some people, the Rambam just hasn't done enough. He's not really done justice to hell and the world to come, because all you've done is been cut off. I don't get a greater punishment than that. And you realize that for the Rambam, that is real existence. And the same goes, by the way, in this world, because everything that we have, all the Judaism is pushed towards, for the Rambam, is this connection to God. By refining ourselves, again, morally, spiritually, intellectually, we create this channel, this two-way channel with God. And we connect to him, and that's how God's blessing, God's providence comes back to us. And he says many times that the stronger our connection is up with him, the greater the flow of the shefa, the flow of influence, which comes back down again. It's a constant flow, it's a constant connection. And that is the relationship. And the same channel, the same connection you have while you're alive in Olam Haba, which is the providential relationship with him, that's when once a person dies, that just translates into the Olam Haba, because everything's about this relationship. The whole of Judaism is about this relationship. Shir HaShirim is called Holy of Holies by Rabbi Akiva. And that puts our relationship with God very literally into a husband-wife type relationship, where the husband's speaking at the wife, and it puts it very clearly in these terms, because Judaism is all about the relationship with God.
Taking a break for a few seconds to give you a quick announcement. If you haven't joined our Listening to Understand WhatsApp community, please do so now. There's a link in the show notes. We're going to be sharing more exciting stuff only for the members of the Listening to Understand WhatsApp community. See you there. Who is the most extreme insight from the Talmud? Who gives us the most understanding on what hell is? Maze Geyhinom, Dinosha Geyhinom, Kafakela, all these terminologies that almost everybody knows how to quote, but don't know how to explain. Besides Kafakela, they say that your soul is going from one side of the earth to the other. I don't know why that makes somebody so scared.
I think one takes all of them and just says these all must be metaphors, because they just don't mean anything when you're dealing with it in a literal way. He says similar things about Yemot HaMashiach, the times of Mashiach, and we know there are certain promises we have and certain things which are going to happen which are great. Mikdash will be rebuilt, there'll be prophecy, but exactly how it will come about and what will happen and the details, we don't really know. We don't have a tradition for that. People sometimes feel they need to know everything. They have to have precise knowledge of what this sin will do or that sin will do. We have to be, Rambam teaches we have to be humble. We have to know the limits. As a big part of the morals of him is knowing the limits of our capability to understand and appreciating that and working within that.
So who besides the Rambam researches the afterlife, Olam Haba?
The Ramban has a Shar HaGemul, where he goes into it in a bit more of a mystical way. But the Ramban is because the Rambam he takes on more a Kabbalistic framework of understanding Judaism. So whereas for the Rambam you have pure physicality and then pure spirituality, and the two don't really mix. So angels can't come into the physical world. It's binary. You can't either the one or the other. For the Ramban and for the Kabbalists, there's much more of a spectrum of existence. You start off with the emanations, which start off as being purely spiritual, purely metaphysical, and it goes through all different worlds till you reach our world of pure physicality. So there's a framework really for the soul or parts of the soul which are somewhere between physical and spiritual, to have some kind of non-physical, non-spiritual fire or punishment or angels dealing with them. It opens things up much more, which allows you to take these metaphors a little bit more literally. But again, exactly what they mean, Geyhinom is a good example of that. What is Geyhinom? It's a valley where during the first Mikdash period, the idolaters used to offer up their kids as child sacrifice to the idols and burn their own kids to death. And it was such a horrific thing. It was the most horrific thing the Navi could ever imagine. So that word is used to describe hell. Yeah, it's just
So it is a mashal.
yeah, of course it's a mashal. It is a place. I mean, it's a Geyhinom Valley in Yerushalayim nowadays. It's the Rambam writes in Perek Chelek that I think he says pretty much explicitly that Geyhinom is there are many different Talmudic teachings about it. Some say the sun will come out of its casing and burn. Some people say this, some people say that. And he says the Talmud doesn't really explain adequately what it is. All we know is that there is a tradition that there's a idea of reward and punishment. It's a place of punishment. But that's not the... He brings that as a building up to the idea of Olam Haba. Olam Haba, where we relate to God, where we connect to God, that is the primary part of the afterlife.
How many times is the word Geyhinom mentioned in the Talmud?
I can't tell you. Dinner shel Geyhinom. It's used as a metaphor for punishment of the wicked.
Is basically what happens after when our soul goes back.
So if you take the Rambam very literally at his words, the Geyhinom is basically the same as courage, a cut off, and it's the lack of existence which is the real punishment. However, I try in my book to develop an idea, it gets a little bit complex because it ties into the idea of Techiyat HaMesim, resurrection of the dead. But what does it mean, resurrection of the dead? How does it work in the Rambam system? So the Rambam takes it that the dead will actually come back to life for a certain period of time and then die again and go to the actual Olam Haba, which is where they're fully a soul while they're connected with God. And I suggest some kind of way of reconciling all the sources where the shame and embarrassment that people feel when they're resurrected and they see what they could have achieved, they see what other people are achieving, what they could have achieved, that is some level of Geyhinom. The burning shame. We see very often in rabbinic works that shame is equated with burning fire. Tamar, it's equated to the Hashem and Yehuda, also thrown into the fire. It's better for to be thrown in the fire than shamed. There are a number of sources where deep shame and deep regret, realizing the one has gone wrong. That is, for example, when Yitzchak suddenly realizes that he's been fooled and he realizes who Yaakov is and who Yitzchak is, it says he trembles with very great trembling. And Midrash says on that, he sees the fires of Geyhinom opening up underneath him. What is happening? He suddenly realizes that the last 40 years of his life, he's been fooled. He's been working he's been relating to his whole family under false presumptions. Realizing that sudden great trembling, my whole life has been, I've been messed around. I've been dealing with everything and it's falsely. That is a Gehenna. It's a terrible, terrible feeling.
I'm wondering if I always wondered, is it shame? They say the busha, people are going to know the truth, everybody's going to see, but it just makes no sense to me that it's about anybody else but God and you.
So I don't know it's other people seeing, but it's a realization. There's another place in Sefer Bereshit where Chazal connect this great. But when Yosef says to the brothers, Ani Yosef, and they're unable to reply, they're so confounded, they're unable to reply. And there's a midrash on that which says, in the same way as the brothers were unable to reply, so too will be the din lavo people, meaning people who work under certain presumptions. And the brothers had gone through their life, they'd thrown their brother in the pit, tried to kill him, sold him to slavery, but they justified all of themselves. That was all fine. They'd built up this whole false narrative to which everything they did was justified. And suddenly they see Yosef's there, his dreams were correct. All these decades under which we were living under a false presumption, we were sinners. Our whole life has been a lie. Our whole life has been it's not about other people seeing. It's about this realization that, wow, I've messed up really badly. And that is I can't go and explain all the sources and all the network of different things I bring together in that chapter, but I suggest that for Rambam, another way of understanding Geyhinom is that when people are brought back at the time of resurrection of the dead, they have some kind of realization of what it could have been. There's a Gemara where in the Doron, where Shlokish says, there's no Geyhinom in the time to come. What will happen? God will bring the sun out of its case. Again, this idea of the sun, this bright light. The tzaddikim will rejoice in it. And the shalim will be, I don't know what it says, will be ashamed or will be burned. But that is the same light, when God reveals the great truth to the world, people who have been righteous, who've been living their lives in the correct way, that would be a great source of comfort and, again, connection to God. Whereas with the wicked and the evil who've been laboring under false presumptions, suddenly this bright light will be there, there'll be no more excuses. Though they won't be able to fool themselves any longer, and they'll have this deep level of regret. And it's not really shame because everyone's watching me, but self-shame.
Right. Yeah, or I feel like it's regret. I often say to my children that hell can be in this world too. Hell can be right here, living here, having the opportunity, and you're not seizing it in the right way.
I think that's what I was saying with Yitzhak. When that moment when he realized that he'd been fooled and he was laboring under false presumptions, hell opened up in front of him.
Mamash.
That's what you're saying.
Mamash, like that the term living hell is these opportunities that we have. And I was just speaking to somebody yesterday, and we were talking. I speak to a lot of people that struggle a lot with mental health. And somebody said to me, why do you think there's so much suffering? Why? Like, what did I do to deserve this? And it's usually mental health is not something that you acquire or you walk towards. It just comes, and it's literally the epitome of hell. And I say to them that, in my opinion, going through it, it's not about, it's what I gained out of it to learn for my future in this moment. Otherwise, that's misery. We can live through hell to get to a better place. But if we didn't learn from it,
you can build a person, you're saying.
If I didn't learn from it, that's misery. That's just a continuous living hell with no outcome.
Right.
But we can really experience it here in this world of not creating meaning within the life and being a constant participant in what is happening to us from God, which we don't understand.
Very much, definitely.
I want to go back to the question of what I originally asked you. So if somebody asked you, where is Hitler? Where are these evil people? Where are the Hamas terrorists that murdered all these people on October 7th? What would you say to them?
Personally, it's not a question which bothers me. It's not something which I feel is part of my relationship with God. I know there's a system of rewarding punishment. I don't know of any place they are in. It could be there is some kind of divine punishment for their soul. Even if there was, I probably wouldn't understand what that even means in order to be able to understand and explain this to someone else. But yeah, there's an argument within the Rambam, the commentaries on the Rambam, where the Kares and hell literally just means that they're cut off like animals, and that is the worst form of punishment. Or whether that level of cutting off and punishment is after some kind of divine system of punishment for the soul. So there are different commentaries in the Rambam that take out different ways. But instead of saying they're having punishment, then is that again, as the Muslims would say, they're in this level of hell, being burnt and given new skins to be burnt again, and having this poured over them and that poured. I don't know. I just don't think in those terms. I don't find it. I'm reassured the fact there is a God and there is a system of reward and punishment and divine justice that I believe in, and I don't get involved beyond that.
Yeah, what I like to say is it doesn't give me comfort for my life knowing that someone evil is being taken care of. That's not where I'm getting my intimacy with God, by the fact that they did evil and they're getting their punishment. I want to approach my life by what is here, and hopefully I'll acquire for the future for me, not worrying, did the evil get their punishment?
And then what's the divine system of justice and what's taken into account or what isn't? It's beyond that. Then we said at the end of Eov, which is the book all about explaining suffering. God really says, were you there when I created the world? And all his friends come along and try to explain away, you must be suffering because you did a sin, you must be suffering because of this. And they're all thrown out. And the message at the end is that we just don't really understand the divine system of justice. There is a system of justice. This world, the next world is taken care of. But we only get a very small little picture of what's going on. I had a friend in Yeshiva that used to give this mashal of, if you're an alien coming down from Mars and you land in a hospital ward and you see some guy lying down there and a guy with a knife cutting them open, you think it's some awful guy. He's a surgeon coming to heal him. Just don't know how that mashal always works, but the idea is that we get a small picture of this world and we don't even see what's happening though. We don't know what's happening in people's minds. We don't know what's motivating them, what choices they made, what choices they didn't make. It's something which just goes well beyond our abilities to even assess any sort of system of justice.
One of the things that I want to learn a lot about is Gilgulim, that we talk about coming back, and do we choose our redo? Do we really choose the form? Are we really coming back to fix what we did in previous lives? How many times do we get to come back? And I often wonder if part of the idea of the afterlife, consequence, punishment, I don't know if there's punishment. Maybe there's consequence. I think there's cause and effect. I don't know if there's mamash onesh. It's a bechira. That's part of bechira, doing right and wrong. So I choose to believe that it's consequence. I wonder if part of Geyhinom is that there is no way to come back again, to redo, to fix. Does anybody in the Mefarshim talk about that?
Again, this is widely discussed. There's a Mishnah that talks about Dinah Shel Geyhinom is 12 months. As I mentioned in the book, again, doesn't really make a lot of sense, because if you're dealing in the spiritual world, there's no concept.
There's no time.
Again, this is another one of the things I bring in, that it just seems to be something temporary. And it's one of the things I bring to show that maybe it happens within the time of resurrection of the dead in the physical world. But there's so many different ideas that people throw in there. Gilgul, not everyone agrees with. Sadia Gons as it comes in from the outside. The Rambam doesn't discuss it.
The Rambam does not discuss Gilgul?
He doesn't mention it. And Sadia Gon says that it's not a Jewish concept. Others do.
It's not.
Right. Others, particularly the Kabbalists, do bring it in and rely very strongly on it. So this just goes to the point that there is a system of divine justice, reward and punishment. And when the time comes, hopefully we'll see the right side of it.
Wow. So maybe there is a certain emunah pshuta that we have to take with these things to know that we don't know. Maybe the approach is, I need to know that I don't understand and be okay with that. There is a system that I won't understand in this world because we can't comprehend it. And that's okay. And maybe it's a beautiful thing. Maybe it's a gift. Maybe it's a matana. Because if we did understand, maybe our bechira would be taken away a little bit. And God really wants to have the intimacy, the relationship with him through bechira.
Without understanding everything.
Right? And maybe that's the whole...
We shouldn't be obsessed and focused with the next world. Yeah, again, Muslims are running around doing everything. They're obsessed with the world to come, all the details of it, and blowing themselves up to get the world to come. Our focus, so it says, Rav is building a divinely ordained community, a good, godly community within this world. That is what Judaism is all about. And if you're obsessed with the world to come, we think in those terms.
You miss the opportunity because you're not living in the now. You're living only for the outcome of the future, and you're ceasing the moment of the true living in the mindful of the now.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so beautiful. So, first of all, I want to tell you another crazy thing that I realized through reading what Jesse sent me was that Gan Eden is not in the next world. Everybody says, oh, the neshama is in Gan Eden, it's going to Gan Eden, but Adam and Chava were taken out of Gan Eden in this world, in this physical world, not when they were neshamot. Why is it that we believe that Gan Eden is in the next world? Where do we get that concept?
Because again, we're never sure when Gan Eden is used as a metaphor or when it's used literally. Gan Eden could just mean paradise, or it could just mean it's this perfect, idyllic setting. It could be used to describe a perfect setting in this world or in the next. Or in the Messianic era, when this will become idyllic, then maybe that's described as Gan Eden, and the souls will be different ways to describe it.
So is there Gan Eden in the next world? Is there any sources to know that there is Gan Eden, which is like the Ziva Shechina sitting like there? I don't know if it's real sources or it's just something that we were taught in elementary school, that the tzaddikim are sitting by the Kisei HaKavod Ne'anim Ziva Shechina, right? And that is the epitome of Gan Eden.
So that is described as Olam Haba. That is the world to come. That's the Gemara describes as Olam Haba. You can give it the name Gan Eden. It's just a lot of these terms are used interchangeably and loosely. And I just come back to the fact that, that's the Gemara that you just mentioned. The Ziva Shechina is the Rambam's primary source when it comes to Olam Haba, because he says it's a spiritual experience. It's just the neshama that are getting the Ziva Shechina, and it's not a place of bodies and bodily functions. And again, it's the Jewish view of the afterlife rather than the physical one. You could call it Gan Eden, but what do we gain by giving it a different term? Gan Eden is the label used to describe a perfect idyllic setting. That's really...
So it's just basically a blissful place of truth and connection and clarity.
Which is what Adam and Chava had prior to their fets. Before their sin, they had this wonderful, pure connection to God. So the Rambam talks about how they were able to relate to God in a much more emet v'sheker. They're able to discern God's will much more easily. And that's really Geyhinom. That's having that very pure connection. Same thing as the souls will have in the future. Yeah, a lot of these terms are used interchangeably, just like many terms for hell are used interchangeably. Be'er shachas and Geyhinom and various other ones.
Do you think that like 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, you would approach Judaism and Torah from a different perspective of emunah pshuta, without the fear of Geyhinom, without these big, if you do, you will go to, and these are the punishments? Was there more hibur eloki in the day-to-day from ahavat Hashem, from connection from Hashem?
It's hard to tell because you have both sources. You have sources which talk about Ahava and Avram Avi and connecting to God as it's for the sake of it. But you also have sources with blessings and curses. If you have these passages in the Torah, the Teshuvah and the Parshas Brachas, because as we said right at the beginning, you need both. When people are starting off and they're not very sophisticated, they need the blessings and the curses in front of them. But our problem is that people don't use that as a stepping stone. They view that as the entirety of Judaism. So I would say that at all times there were the people who are the more sophisticated thinkers. There were the prophets who related to God on a more truthful level, as Antigonus would say, Shalom and for us, not doing things in order to receive a reward. And he was misunderstood by people because they could get. That goes back to answer your question right at the beginning. Antigonus was someone who related to God on this very pure level, doing what was in the words of the Rambam, to do the MS into one the MS because it's MS, to want the truth because it's truth. And he tried to teach this to his students, and they couldn't accept it. They couldn't internalize it because there was so much in terms of reward and punishment. They ended up saying, Antigonus believes there's no reward and punishment. They ended up setting off different movements. So that really is a source for what we were discussing earlier, that yes, Antigonus was the god Ladar, and he was trying to teach this to his students. They weren't capable of accepting it.
Wow. So maybe they learned from that, the yeshiva world learned from there that it's dangerous. I'm not joking. Maybe it could lead to kfira, or it's so ingrained in the teachings that there's reward and punishment, it becomes part of the Jewish experience.
On the other hand, Antigonus' Mishnah is right there at the start of Pirkei Avot, teaching you this lesson. So, as the Rambam puts it, it's a lifelong journey to really want to do the truth because it's the right thing. It's very hard. It's a very pure level of way of relating to God and Judaism. And it's not something which people get as kids, something you have to develop and internalize. And
at what point should we start teaching the beauty of being, like, emphasizing that we have the choice and really trusting a child or a teenager to tap into the choice without the fear that if I don't give them the fear, they're going to choose the wrong thing for them?
To an extent, each person is different. There's some adults who aren't even able to achieve this level of, when you're dealing with kids and threatening them, and they're getting to the age of 16, 17, 18, and at some point they're going to be making their own choices pretty soon. So you have to be able to train them to some extent to be able to make their own choices, make their own mistakes,
and build out,
beginning with a safety net, and then that's part of bringing up kids in not just in religion and in everything, to give them a little bit of freedom to make their own mistakes, and hopefully they'll learn from it.
Do you feel that Torah and the Talmud gives a lot of emphasis on sechar?
It has both, because it does talk about if you do the mitzvah, then you'll get this bracha and that bracha. On the other hand, we have, again, Pirkei about Sechar Mitzvah, Seir Aveira, meaning the real reward of a mitzvah is that you've done a mitzvah, you've created that relationship with God.
It's the privilege.
Right, Sechar Aveira, you've destroyed something, and that is the greatest punishment you have. Yes, you can threaten you'll get this, you'll get that, you'll get blessing, you'll get advice, but real Sechar Mitzvah, Sechar Aveira is very profound. So we've got both sources within our tradition, because they're both relevant to different stages of development of us as Jews and our relationship with God.
Do you believe that by telling kids, teenagers, that even the Rambam wasn't sure about what hell is and the consequence can lead them to say, you know what, I'm out, I'm not choosing? And if they are saying, is choosing Judaism through force and fear of hell what God wants from us?
Again, to an extent that it depends on the kid, and it depends how you say it. So putting it negatively as people don't really know what they're talking about, or the spiritual realm is so profound and so great and so beyond what we can understand we cannot explain it in its fullest extent. And you can give the sort of examples the Rambam does, like trying to explain a beautiful picture to a blind person or beautiful music to a deaf person. You can try, but you can use metaphors and analogies. You're not really going to get that. So too, trying to explain the pleasures of the soul to a physical being, you can use metaphors. You're not really going to hit the nail on the head because they just don't have the capability. They don't have the tools to internalize it. So you can explain it in a more positive way rather than just saying, well, they don't really know what they're talking about.
I think it's like if somebody doesn't have the beauty of the relationship with Judaism and understanding of God, they're going to miss out on the experience of knowing, of choosing. And I feel that maybe we, in the yeshiva system, maybe we are taking away from the beauty of what it's all about. We reduce the teaching of the zchut, of the permission to be a human. Tal Ben Shachar always talks about the permission to be human. And I think God created us as humans. And when we go through Tanakh, we share all these stories of the human part, Yehuda and Tamar, right? Like this week's Parsha. Like we have so much that teaches, but at the same time, we don't emphasize and give them permission
we
to
built up the great people to such great people that they can't make mistakes, and then they're no longer able to act as role models for us. So again, bringing in reverse in the end of this matter. If we negate any mistake or error that Moshe, Avram, one of the Shvatim makes, and it can't really be a mistake because they're so great, was really, we're supposed to see that they're great people, they made mistakes, and they weren't knocked down by it, they came back stronger. Going back to your point before, Yehuda made a terrible error. He turned around, he said, I did something wrong, and he came back very strong from it. Levi was criticized strongly for it with the Shechem. He came back very strongly. He became the strongest of the tribes. So, as Rav says, by pushing up the great people to such an extent, we lose our role models. That's exactly something which is in the yeshiva world, we think that these people are so much greater than us. We can't really relate to them. We can't really take lessons from them. It's just a different type of existence.
Yeah. And recently I was wondering why the story of Yehuda and Tamar originally says, take her out and burn her. A woman, your daughter-in-law, take her out and burn her out of judgment. Now, I think Rashi says there, the truth is I don't want to say because I don't remember. Maybe you remember. What does Rashi say there?
She's judged as a Bas Kohen.
Maybe, yeah. And because she was a Bas Kohen, so she had a din of Sreifa, and she was a Neshet Ish because she was married already to two of his sons, and she was supposed to do Yibum through Sheila. And I'm like, wait, I don't understand. He didn't even bring it to Beis Din. He didn't even bring it to Sanhedrin. He just on the spot made a verdict of murder to a woman. And do we talk about the fact that it was not okay? But yet, Mashiach comes from him because he said, Tzedkami many.
The difficulty, and if you think about the ancient world, the ancient system, when you're a guy who's the head of a big clan, the patriarchal system, you're head of a clan, you have absolute power. And people in those positions never admit they're wrong. After the whole story of the Megillah, Achashverosh, once the king said something, it never changes. Kings and great people were considered people who would never change their mind. That's part of their greatness. And he was able to, David HaMelech also, to turn and say, I did something wrong. In contrast to Shaul, when he's confronted by Shmuel, and he's trying to justify it. And then once he's given the punishment, he apologizes. It's realizing part of it is a lesson of Teshuvah, but yeah, we see there's something very wrong.
And often it's taught, don't think he did something wrong, versus saying, wait, maybe he did something wrong. And maybe he admitted it at the time. And let's learn from it that Teshuvah and Hoda'ah, like saying, humiliating, like humiliation of Gadol Hadar saying, I basically slept with a prostitute.
Right.
The outrageous humiliation. And what does he get? Greatness. And I think if we took these stories to emphasize Gadlut Adam, of being the Adam, of being the human through the experience of life, and having this dynamic relationship with right and wrong sometimes, and it's sometimes so unclear.
Making the lessons of the Torah real to ourselves rather than thinking it was some distance.
Yeah. So How do you teach like emunah to ahavat Hashem to your children as a father?
Well, first of all, I never talk in terms of, well, if you do this or don't do that, God's going to strike you down. We don't talk in that sort of terms at all. I try to figure out this is an opportunity for us to come and to come to shul, come to Hashem, be part of things, come along for this chesed opportunity. I try to explain the significance and the greatness of what we're doing rather than the consequences of not doing it. That's what I would say is a starting point.
When kids in our generation see extreme hypocrisy from right and wrong, it's very hard to connect to Hashem because they feel like the leaders are the representation of spirituality, of Judaism. And when the leaders are not doing what feels right and what the neshama feels like it's wrong, so they often say, I'm out. How do we as parents motivate them to build their own relationship with Hashem and not see the leaders, as teachers, parents even, as the representation of God? How do we teach them to trust them that they can have their own relationship with God and it might be different than ours and that's okay?
It's really having to encourage them when they do something which isn't quite the way we would do something. It's important to still encourage that step and to show them examples of different sorts of people, different sorts of communities. For example, whether it's Haredi, Dati Leumi, don't just be, or in this community and this is good. Everything these people do is bad. They must be motivated by something negative. Each time you see someone who's doing something positive, even outside my immediate community or the section I'm in, talk them up. Say, okay, and be prepared to say that this person isn't doing quite how we live, but look what they're doing there. That's fantastic. That's great. And similarly, if someone within your community, within what you would aspire for your kids to be, is doing something not quite right, don't be all defensive and say, well, their rabbi says so, it must be 100% right. Be prepared to have that conversation. And yes, people aren't perfect. Everyone's trying to do the best they can, hopefully. And be prepared to say, yes, these are positive role models of different types. And you can be like any of these types. And if you go, as long as you're being a genuinely good person, trying to build your relationship with God, trying to make the world a better place as a result of being it, all of these different options are plausible, and be proud of you going into any of these different sections, any different examples.
Shmuel, thank you so much for this education class.
Thank you very, very much. I really enjoyed the discussion. I've clarified many of my ideas I thought today.
Thank you. And thank you for your books that you gifted the world and permission to think beyond and to understand more and to be okay in the question area and in the research area. And I think it's important for our generation specifically, but I feel like a lot of people are searching for more, are yearning for more clarity. These conversations and these books like you wrote give comfort, really give comfort, because the being in the unknown can be so dark sometimes. And unfortunately, I speak to a lot of people that they say, I just feel like a robot. I want more. I want connection. And you give that and you gift that in your scripture and your books.
And your podcast, more people will be able to find the right sources for dealing with these sorts of questions and other questions that you make available.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Understand. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please hit that follow button on your favorite podcast app. This way you don't miss an episode and you help us grow. You are part of our growth. We appreciate your support and we hope you choose to listen to us on our next episode. We'd love to hear from our audience. If there's anything you would like us to research, to talk about, please contact us on our website, listeningtounderstand.com. And if there's any insight that you got from this and you want to share with others and you are happy for us to read it out loud on our show, send us your insights. Send us your thoughts. We want to listen to understand. Bye till next time.